Yep. Hello. Right. Well, thank you for joining us for the final session in the Safety Theatre at this year's Rail Live. My name is David Stubbings. I'm the news editor of Rail Magazine, and I'm joined by Andrew Hall, the Chief Inspector of Rail Accidents. So this year is 20 years of the RAIB, and we're going to have a little spend the next half an hour having a chat with Andrew, talking about the investigation branch. So, Andrew, first of all, I think we should probably start with the creation of the RAIB. So, can you just chat a bit about how the Rail Accident Investigation Branch came about 20 years ago?
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, David. After Lord Cullen's inquiry into the Ladbroke Grove crash in 1999, Lord Cullen made a large number of recommendations. Some of them were quite, I'll call them hard and technical, to do with train protection and warning system and so on. And some of them were much more organisational, about how the railway should be set up in terms of safety. And what Lord Cullen recommended, and in fact what we now have, is an independent rail accident investigation body modelled on the air accident branch and the marine accident branch. A standard setting body within the railway, which was then called Railway Safety, and is now morphed into RSSB, and effectively keeping that independent from the regulator, the ORR. So what we have is a construct of effectively three legs. So that was one of the drivers for the RAIB. Lord Cullen recommended it and said what he thought it should do. At the same time, or a little bit after that, there was a European Safety Directive, I think in 2003, which required member states to have an independent, what is called in Europe, national investigation body for railways. So the legislation in the UK effectively did kill two birds with one stone. It addressed Lord Cullen's recommendations, and it dealt with the European requirements of the time. So in 2005, October 2005, we, the RAIB, went live, and we have a very simple mission that hasn't really changed, which will probably come into play in some of my later answers. All we do is we independently investigate accidents in order to improve railway safety and inform the industry and the public. And over the time we've been doing it, that particular mission hasn't changed. That's what we were set up to do, and that's what we do. And
you've been with the RAIB, I think, pretty much since its creation. So can you tell us a bit about your own career and how you got into the rail industry and how you got into the RAIB?
Okay, so a very long time ago, I started as a student apprentice in a large manufacturing company in Stafford. We made electrical equipment, and I then got an electrical engineering degree and became a design engineer for both doing things in both the static realm, i.e. railway substations, and under trains. I think to compress the next 13 years, I became a project engineer dealing with trains and their interfaces with the railway systems, and I did that on the underground, and I did that overseas. And I came back, worked for a consultancy in Derby, and then, and this isn't a particularly meaningful bit of the story, I saw an advert in a, be careful now, trade magazine, and I applied. I thought the job looked interesting. It offered training. It seemed to have a laudable cause, if you like, outcome. And I applied on spec and had to rush down the post office and pay extra to get my application at the last minute, because in those days, of course, that was how you did it.
So over those last 20 years, what changes in accident profile have you sort of seen in the branch scene?
The accepting some recent footpath level crossing accidents, the early 2000s we tended to see and do a lot more level crossing work, and over time the way that level crossing risk is managed has improved no end. So that profile has changed. Freight train derailments, rather strangely, when we started there were a lot of freight train derailments. then it seemed to subside, which people at the time put down to maintenance coming back in-house. But then a few years after that, there was another sort of rise in what we think we saw. And again, that now seems to have, touch wood, tailed off again. So sometimes there are, if you like, spates of accidents that you think you can attribute to something, and sometimes there is a rather random element to it. I have spent 20 years trying to work out exactly why some things happen and exactly why they don't. So those two things have definitely changed. If I refer back to Richard Hines' talk this morning, in recent years, the track worker near-miss profile has changed as a result of actions taken by the industry in terms of red zone working. What I would say, though, is there are still near misses, and some of them are very close, and we still see them and we still investigate them. But they are not at the level that they used to be at. So that's changed. Overall, and I suppose it's worth talking about overall, the railway in nearly all metrics is safer now than it was 20 years ago. To what do we credit that? Well, I think I do credit it a lot to Lord Cullen's setup, if I'm honest. The RAIB can't claim credit for a graph that always has looked like that for 20 years. There's the RAIB, there's the regulator, the ORR, and there's the industry and RSSB. And by working in the way we've worked, I think overall, what came out of Ladbroke Grove in that sense, that construct has been successful.
Yeah, I think just the point about level crossings. I know there's sort of parts of the country that they're footpath crossings, but Network Rail sort of said we can't increase a timetable because there are still crossings and the risk is too great, and that's probably a change in attitude that's come over the years as well. So that's just something I've noticed.
Yeah, the culture around level crossings has changed a lot in the last 20 years. The way crossings are viewed, the way the public's use of them and the public's behaviour in relation to them is viewed by the railway has changed a lot.
Yeah, and sort of linking that, so over these last 2 decades, have there been sort of investigations that have led to sort of industry change? I mean, we touched on the level crossings a little bit. Are there any sort of others that have come up?
Yes. I'm always a bit wary of the sort of mega recs question that says, is there one recommendation that's done things? I mean, there are things that you can see. You can see what happened to stretcher bar design after Greyrig. You can see that there's a light railway and standards board after Croydon tram accident. So there are these big chunky things that come out of big accidents, but there's an awful lot of other things that you might not really think about around. We now have LED wigwags and we don't use filament bulbs. We now measure wagon twist at certain intervals that we didn't used to do. The sort of thing that sounds really rather possibly slightly uninteresting, but in actual fact, all these things contribute to a steady decline in the rate of serious accidents.
Yeah. The annual report for 2024 lists 6 sort of major themes that came up, and for the benefit of the people in the room, I'll just list them quickly. So I think track worker safety, platform safety, asset integrity, safety of the line after engineering work, safe operation of plant in possessions, and management of trees. So they were sort of the 6 sort of themes, sort of broad themes that came from last year's investigations. And they are, I think, what's sort of described as a snapshot of the heavier end of sort of incident profiles, sort of in 2024. Out of sort of those sort of themes, which have sort of been sort of more of a constant over sort of the last few years, and how sort of has the RAIB seen sort of progress in from the industry in addressing some of those areas?
Okay, I think the first thing I'd stress is the point that you were making, which is these are a snapshot of 1 year as seen by an accident investigator who tends to look just at the serious end of the spectrum. So They will overlap what RSSB's models will say. They will overlap what the ORR will say, but they won't be identical. Back to my original point, I think, we have 3 independent elements here, and one of the, if you like, the price of that is they don't always quite come to the same conclusion, which some people don't think is good and some people think is very good. But the good bit about it is you're much less likely to have something drop through the gaps in between because you've got 3 different ways of looking at it. So what these themes are our judgments of what our workload in 2024 was. If to answer the question, which ones of these are more perennial effectively? Well, safety of track workers, most definitely. Platform safety, most definitely. I think in recent times, asset integrity. Now, whether you call it asset integrity, some people refer to climate change and an aging asset. That whole spectrum of difficulty. The others are a bit more, certainly safety of line after engineering work. That's a really good example of something that there were quite a few of those around in 2018. So people doing engineering work, usually at night, leaving something, either part of an access point, scrap rail, whatever, or a trolley on the line, and then it being struck. There was quite a lot of that in 2018 because I remember we issued urgent safety advice. It then dropped, and in 2024 or around 2024, we saw 3 really serious incidents of that. So I wouldn't say that's been there all the time. That sort of has come and gone and come back. Safe operation of plant in possessions. I suspect this is one where it's what happens statistically. I'm not blind to the fact that there are things that go on at night in possessions that probably people are not aware of, perhaps should be aware of more. Whether they manifest themselves at a level that the RAIB get involved in, some years they do, and some years they don't. And in 2024, they certainly did, because there were at least 2 or 3 very nasty incidents where people were injured or seriously injured and could have been hurt worse. And the last one, management of trees. That was really in there because we had 2 bad incidents with third-party trees. So trees are a constant issue on the railway. 9 times out of 10, the RAIB won't have much to do with it. A tree will fall down, a train will hit it, it probably won't penetrate the windscreen, the train won't derail, and we're unlikely to become involved. These particular cases, one was the Scottish one where the HST cab was severely damaged and the driver had to crouch down behind a seat in order to avoid serious injury or worse. And the other one was out in Thetford Forest where the train derailed after the tree came down. But in both cases, the interesting thing about these 2 and the reason we took them on was the trees were outside Network Rail's control and the trees weren't dying or diseased. So the usual criteria for doing something about trees is if they're seen to be dying or diseased. These trees were neither dying nor diseased. There were other factors around the way they were being managed by third parties, factors around the climate, factors around the soil. So they were rather more interesting to us than many, many tree jobs. So I think with trees, tree issues are there all the time. It just happened that we found 2 that we thought were rather special.
Something I was just thinking, how does the RAIB sort of decide how much it's going to investigate? So it might be worth just going through, because you mentioned an urgent safety notice just now, and you publish safety digests and that, so it might be helpful just to...
Yeah, I can do that. In essence, this question is the most key question that any investigator has to answer. The question is, do I investigate this or don't I? And generally speaking, to misquote an old advert, it's the jobs you don't do that can often be more problematic to you than the jobs you do. Because sometimes people want you to do something and you choose not to. So how do we choose what to do? So some jobs are legally mandated. So the law says if a train collides or a train derails, if a person loses their life or 5 people are seriously injured or there's a lot of damage caused, that has to be investigated by law. So that's no choice. And also, if in slightly different circumstances that could have happened, that's no choice either. So they're mandated. On top of that, we have the capacity to do some non-mandatory. And you'd be quite surprised at how serious some of the non-mandatory stuff is. But the way that we really choose, and I won't go through the whole process because there's a lot of process, but there's two basic criteria you have to think about. If the consequence is serious, you've got to have a really good idea you're not going to learn anything new. So if I get also anything proportionate. So if I give you an example, if someone was ill on a platform edge, fell off the platform and was struck by a train, we probably wouldn't investigate it if they were struck quickly by the train. Because the way to stop that from happening is probably so disproportionate, fitting platform screen doors everywhere, that we probably wouldn't do it. So at that end of the scale, it's really serious. Someone has lost their life, but we might not do it. At the other end, if there's been no harm done at all, you've got to be pretty sure you're going to learn something before you start embarking on months of work and quite a lot of effort to do it. And between those two ends of the spectrum, there's a whole sort of taper of trying to balance how serious was it or how serious could it have been against what are we really going to learn that's new. And those two things and the balance of those two things are basically what decides what we do.
And sort of coming back, so as well as the 6 themes in the annual report, so the RAIB also has 10 sort of summaries of learning. I won't read them all out, but sort of some of the subjects in those are user work level crossings, track workers, freight train derailments, the design and operation of on-track plant and trolleys. And so can you just explain the difference between the themes that come up in the annual report and the summaries of learning and how they're treated?
Yeah, okay. So the themes in the annual report are a short snapshot over 1 year. It's an annual report for 2024, so the themes in it all relate to 2024, or something might have happened in 2023 and was published in 24, but it's all basically a year's work. Over the longer term, as a bit of a resource really for industry and for the regulator, we have these summaries of learning which are published on the website. There is quite a lot of overlap some years between the longer term stuff, and by longer term I'm sort of talking 10 to 15 year span of time, and that really these summaries of learning are the points that we've made in the reports and lists of the reports associated with whatever the issue is. But I suppose what you can take from them is they are over a longer period, a 10-year period, these are the things that have kept cropping up in our world. So these are the things that have led to fairly serious outcomes a number of times.
And obviously everyone knows about the work, the investigations and the publications of reports by the RAIB, but to what degree does the RAIB also help sort of the rail industry beyond the investigations and listing and sort of coming out with recommendations? How does it sort of continue that work after the?
I think, well, I'll go back a tad first and just say that during an investigation, we have to work with the industry that we're investigating. It's a delicate balance. We are an independent accident investigator. We have to effectively draw conclusions on behalf of the public and publish them. But you can't really do that in any normal sense without some interaction. So there's some interaction that the law forces. So we have to consult. You cannot impugn someone's reputation, either a company or a person, although the people aren't identified, of course, without going through a formal process of consultation. But before that, we do pre-consultation. We try to sit with industry parties and take them through the sorts of things we're finding, and coming back further to things like urgent safety advice. If we think there's something early on in an investigation that needs to be put out there, then we have means to do it. So there's a fair bit of cooperation within an investigation anyway. Outside investigation, we tend to, back to Lord Cullen. So Lord Cullen envisaged that the RAIB would actually set industry standards for investigation. That's not the way the law ended up, but morally, and probably because of what Lord Cullen said, we do try to help industry investigators. So in the sense that we're happy to, we do run workshops, we run seminars. If people want us to go to their organisation and help explain things or of what we do, or explain recommendations and how they came to be like that, we'll do it. If people ask, we try to be helpful. What we can't do is we can't tell people how to address the recommendation. The way the law works, that is the ORR to decide whether a recommendation has been implemented. So we make a recommendation legally to the ORR, to the regulator. They pass it on to the industry body. The industry body respond to the ORR. They say, we've done this. And the ORR have to decide in law whether that's sufficient, whether the risk is as low as reasonably practicable. The ORR then tell us that. So we don't have, if you like, policing powers over our own recommendations. And that's important. That can be frustrating at times for us, but the reason it's done is so that if there's another accident later, we can't be part of the cause, because we can't have said that was okay, and then there's an accident and we have to go, we said it was okay. So the system's quite well thought through and quite well thought out. But generally speaking, if people ask for things, we try to help.
Cool. And final one for me, and then we'll open up to any questions from the floor. Rail reform. How do you envisage it having an effect on the RAIB? And if so, how? We'll give you a moment.
This isn't your question, this is the water. Excuse me. Right. So, rail reform.
Okay.
So in terms of RAIB, it won't make a great deal of difference. We are already set up to investigate different ownership models anyway. So we deal with Northern Ireland Railways, tramways, heritage railways. So the way we do the work is not ownership model dependent. So there's no logical reason why, at a high level, we should be affected by rail reform. Also, if you look at all the information on rail reform, you read what's come out of government, there's no reference in it to changing the way accidents are investigated. So I think the simple answer at the moment is, at any high level, I don't think it'll make a difference. Now, procedurally at a low level, who reports what's the phone number, of course, yes, that might change, but that's really low-level process stuff. So the answer to your question really is, I don't envisage any significant change.
Yeah. Probably about the only part of the industry that won't be. So, great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Anyone got any questions from the floor before we wrap up? No? Oh, no. Yes.
Over time, do you think the quality and the depth of your investigations have changed?
I think one or two things have changed. I'd like to think that we've always maintained an integrity about the product, which we've always tried to do. There's always this time-quality balance goes on. And we've always tried to think to ourselves, well, if it's going to take a bit longer to do it right, then we should do it right. The skills we have changed over time, which I suspect means that in some areas the emphasis changes a bit. So when we started, we were numerically more engineering based, I think. Whereas what time has taught us is you need human factor skills, you need organisational kind of skills, which we've put a fair bit of effort into doing. But at the same time, you still need to maintain a sort of what I'll call hard engineering base in order to, if you turn up and there is twisted and bent metal, or you have to be able to, as an organisation, determine what happened before you work out why it happened. But in terms of, do we ask the question why? Yes. There's always there's always a balance to be struck. There's always a line to be drawn. In a sense, it's what's the proportionate end game to what you have in front of you. You can probably you can find jobs and you go, well, you could have gone there and you perhaps could have gone there. And I accept that. There is a judgment to be made. But the overall answer to the question, do I think we produce a quality product now, and do I think we produced a quality product, although it looked slightly different in 2005? Yes, I think we do. In that case, thanks for listening. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.